Hey there, Sheryl here, mental toughness certified high performance coach, best-selling author, speaker, and mother to 3 kids, amazing now adulting kids. And it's a very, very special day that I am here with Greer Meisels, Chief of Staff for the Institute of International Finance. Greer, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule. I cannot wait to hear your golden nuggets of wisdom.
Well, thank you so much, Sheryl. It's terrific to be here. It's terrific to be invited. And yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. It's a great opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, and so before we get into, we were talking before about why international policy matters to everyone. And I was pretty transparent that I did not grow up understanding that. I was not exposed to it. I didn't understand it. And so I can't wait to really hear about not just why it's important, but how it affects each and every one of us. But before we jump into that, I have to ask, how did you get interested in this field of work? Was it a clear, were you clear from the beginning? Was it a very straight shot from A to B, or was it a circuitous route? Because I know that you are an expert in Asia and understanding the policy there and how it relates to us. So can you help us understand a little bit what inspired you?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And I get that asked a lot, kind of why Asia, why China, how did this come to be? And it's funny, I can really sort of pinpoint exactly when it happened, though from that point to, my later career, there were some twists and turns along the way. But I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and went on a field trip with school in 1986, I believe. So I don't want to totally date myself, but I was a young person, and went to an exhibit that was called China, 7,000 Years of Discovery. And even the title of the exhibition sort of blew my mind. I was like, 7,000 years of discovery. I was taking Texas history, and Texas had been a state within the Union, within the United States since 1845. So, we were talking a little over 200 years. And now here's this exhibit that's talking about 7,000 years. And then, I was amazed. I was amazed that there was, so much history that was longer than I could, even calculate at that point in my life. That there were so many different things that I saw in the exhibit that actually I had no idea had started in China and came here to the United States, that traveled the world. Important innovations, important techniques, and there were artisans there as part of the exhibit who were doing kind of handicrafts and, working with silk and doing acrobatics and playing different kinds of musical instruments. And it just kind of blew my mind. And so, I didn't end up going to China until much later in my life. But it was that spark where I thought, wow, there is a world that is much bigger than the world I know, with histories and cultures that have been around for much longer than I can even fathom. And, I want to know more. And so that was kind of the spark that kind of did it for me. And then, I was kind of lucky in that the school I went to had a lot of ancient history classes and requirements to study the history and culture of other countries and other regions. So, it was something that even from a young age, I realized was important and was something I found really interesting. And I mean, truth be told, there was probably a point in my life where I knew more about what was happening in kind of Chinese policy and politics than I knew what was happening domestically. But, so maybe I went down the rabbit hole a little bit too far, but, it was really, it was that thing that I saw that I thought, never experienced anything like this, and there's probably a lot of other things in the world that I haven't experienced, and I want to.
Yeah, and that is so interesting. And I want to have you elaborate on something that we spoke about, prior to going live. And that was, you are now an expert when it comes to international policy, especially for Asia, and also an expert in the area of international finance. Now, you had a really interesting point, something that you shared with me that might inspire other people to try things maybe that they are interested in but don't quite feel qualified for. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So, the one thing I would say is probably few of my coworkers would think that I'm a true expert in international finance or international economics, but I've certainly been working in the field for a while. So I've been now in this field since 2014. I first started in the world of international economics and international diplomacy, economic diplomacy, if you want to call it that, in the U.S. Treasury Department, where I worked for 4 years. And then now I work at a place called the Institute of International Finance, which is a global trade association for the financial services industry. And we have about 450 members across 70 different countries. And so one would think logically, oh, you studied economics, you studied macroeconomics, you studied finance, you did econometrics, you have a very good knowledge base of and educational background for all of the stuff that you've done. And the truth of the matter is, I don't. I've never taken an econ class in my life.
Hang on a second. I want everybody to hear this. Greer has done, and you are chief of staff right now in your organization, and you have never taken a class in economics. So first of all, I want to ask you, because in whether coaching or speaking or working with thousands of people, that is a common thread of some of the world's top performers. And that is something that they're interested in, they go for it, and they learn more later. So good for you.
Exactly. No, and that's true. And, and that's scary, right? I mean, I'm sure that, it was nerve-wracking for me, and people talk about kind of imposter syndrome all the time, but, I was going into a field that I didn't know much about. I didn't necessarily have the expertise. Now, the reason why I was brought in to the Treasury Department initially was to work on China-related issues, and so I did have a background in China, and so that was kind of the hook, that I probably had spent more time in China. I spoke the language, that sort of thing, but not on the econ side, and so that was something that they figured, all right, you can learn, you'll be able to learn enough to be dangerous, and you'll be able to learn on the job, and that's the sign also of a great employer, which Treasury was, and my current organization is, which is, when you recognize talent, you don't necessarily have to have the perfect cookie cutter resume or background, that there's lots of different ways to be successful in a particular field. You just need to kind of, like you said, have the courage to go for it, and not be scared to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I need to look this up, or doing it kind of not announcing it in the middle of a meeting, but taking down the notes and looking it up afterwards and learning it that way. So yeah, I've sort of made a career over the past 7 years or so in a field and in an area that I didn't have any academic training in. So, if I can do it, you can too.
So that's amazing. And so we need to talk about mindset, just to, link up your world and my world a little bit. And also, like I said, I see common threads in some of the world's top performers, such as yourself. And so can you let me know what mindset allowed you to get where you are today? Because, most people, if not all people, have said, and if you've seen it over the course of history, and of course over the history of these interviews, is that success is a circuitous route. A lot of times it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So what mindset has allowed you to keep making progress in a field that is still today male dominated?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I maybe alluded to it before, but I think you need to be resilient. You need to know that you're probably going to take some knocks, and that it can't knock you down permanently. But I think you can't be afraid of failure. Might be too strong a word, but you can't be afraid to make mistakes. And that if you if you're so nervous as to not want to try something because you're scared that you'll make a mistake, you're scared you'll say the wrong thing, you're scared that you'll ask the wrong question, um, you'll never get as far as you could. So, nobody likes to fail. No one likes to try and fail. But, I think more times than not, if you try, you actually succeed. And in my mind, it's not ever really failure if you tried your best. You can try your best at something and it maybe isn't a success. But, if you realize that you put in your all, then that is a success. And that is something that you can be proud of because you did give it your all. Okay, the presentation didn't land. The project that you worked on for a long time didn't come through to fruition. The idea you had for something, somebody knocked it down or said that, we're not going in that same direction. That happens. That happens to everybody. But, you need to try, to not be scared to try and potentially fail. And that's when sometimes you make the greatest sort of gains in your life and have the greatest successes, is if you really push yourself. But at the same time, you can't beat yourself up about it and then, be stuck and scared to try something again. So I think that's one thing that I've always kept in my mind, is that, you need to give it your all, and you need to not be afraid of not succeeding. I don't like to call it failure, but, be afraid of not succeeding, because that happens to everyone.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I'm definitely pulling that quote out of the transcript. And that was that it's not failure if you've tried your best. And so we'll definitely be sharing that one. So important. And so if you were to give some advice to your younger self, as far as what maybe you would have done differently, and what now that you're like, oh, if I knew now what I knew then,
right,
my life would have been a lot more happy, more productive, more successful early on. What is like the biggest piece of advice that you would give to yourself and share with everyone else?
Sure. No, it's a great question. There's probably lots of advice I would have given myself. I guess maybe it's two things, but they're sort of related. One is that you don't need to be perfect. I think my past statement maybe kind of speaks to that a little bit. But there is no such thing as perfection. There is, even people that you look to, that you want to emulate, that you admire, they are not perfect, because that does not exist. So, don't let, perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't beat yourself up about something because you gave a 30-minute presentation that was great, and then at the end maybe you stumbled, or your slide didn't work, or you forgot to say something. You're the only one who's going to notice that. No one's going to care about that. That moment next week, the year after, no one will remember that presentation that you think you botched, which nobody else thought you botched. So, I think that's something that I would have liked to have known, or to have realized earlier on, that, sometimes when you're so worried about being perfect, that also holds you back. So it's that whole kind of fear of failure, fear of not being the best at something. And, it's difficult to be the best at everything. And sometimes, you might not be the best at, at what it is that you're working on, but that's okay, because you're still going to do a great job if you put in the effort. And the other thing I guess I would just say is, another lesson to young Greer, would be that there isn't really a linear path. Some people, let me rephrase, some people do have a linear path. Some people, when they're young, they say, I want to be a doctor, and then they go to medical school, and then they're a doctor, and their trajectory is kind of spelled out and ingrained in them from a young age. And, to those people, I say my hat's off to them, because that's great when you have that. But not everybody does, and opportunities will come up in strange ways, and different people will influence your lives in ways that you weren't expecting, and that you sort of have to be open to that. And again, be willing to kind of take chances, because, often the path to what will end up making you happy is not, A to B to C. You might go A to D, and then suddenly you're down to B again, and then you're up to P. And so you just need to kind of respect that journey and not beat yourself up if things aren't happening exactly in the way that you thought that they would. So those would be two lessons I wish younger Greer had learned earlier on.
Yeah, and I really love what you said too, is don't let perfection get in the way of good, because sometimes perfectionism stops us from speaking up, stops our progress, stops our momentum. And another thing that exemplifies world-class performers is that they keep making forward progress. They fall down, they dust off, they acknowledge they might feel bad, they might experience these things.
Right.
That's what, resiliency is all about. It's honoring the struggle and honoring that it may not feel good, but then making a decision.
Right. Right. No, that's exactly right. And sometimes I still struggle with that. I mean, it's not like I've come to Shangri-La and I realized everything, and I always do practice what I preach. Sometimes I still beat myself up or think, oh my gosh, that was such a disaster, or oh my gosh, that was so bad, I can't believe I did that badly. And then you have to sit back and realize, okay, all right, let's not go down that rabbit hole and that spiral. But that's kind of something you have to work on every day.
Yeah, but the difference, I think, is that you have a high level of awareness. Like, it still happens.
Right.
It's not going to stop your forward momentum, or not as long as maybe it would have.
Right. No, absolutely.
And now, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about international policy and why it matters to everyone. Like I said, this is a little bit selfish on my part, because this isn't something that I was brought up with. Like, this is important. You need to pay attention to this. I have a really good college friend of mine who studied international policy and works for DEI. She's lived all over the world. She's fluent in Russian and all these amazing things. And I thought she's an amazing person. I don't know why she's interested in that, but it sounds really cool. But the conversation that we had leading up to this before we went live was really interesting. So can you shine some light on, from a larger scale, 50,000 foot view, why international policy is important? And then also we'll have a more microscopic view of like why it matters in our home.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, I guess similar to you, I wasn't necessarily brought up in a household that, talked a lot about international affairs and international relations. I mean, we watched the news, and that was great. But, I think, if anything, looking at this past year, looking at the COVID-19 pandemic, sort of shows you how important international cooperation is around things like health crises, pandemics. So many of the things that we are experiencing today are transnational problems. Climate change is a transnational problem. It does not know any borders. It is affecting everybody. It's affecting every country. It's affecting some countries much faster than others. And often it's those countries who actually are least equipped to deal with it. A pandemic, it starts in one part of the world, but it spreads to another. But without international cooperation on vaccine development and vaccine distribution and what that looks like and what that means for international supply chains, and how do you get something from here to there? How do you make sure you have enough testing equipment? Where does that come from? Those are all decisions that are not just intra-country. It's not just happening within the United States. It's a global issue. And so if you start to think about things like that, you realize that so much of your day-to-day existence is influenced by what's happening around the globe, what's happening internationally. And so, sometimes it's difficult to connect those dots because you don't really see, or the dots aren't connected for you. But, I would really there's the old adage, no man is an island, and I'm sure you could say, sure, but some countries are islands, but yes, that's beside the point. But we are all we are all integrally connected, whether it's from a security standpoint, whether it's from a health perspective, whether it's trade, whether it's international finance, and all of that is just a really important part of people's existence, whether they know it or not. And so, there are some people like me who go to a museum and see something about China and think, boy, I'm really interested in China. And there's others who maybe don't see that, but it's there. And I think one thing actually, and I know this is maybe a little bit off topic, but I think that it's really important that those people who work in the field of international policy, whether it's within the government or just, people who study it, who are teaching it, who work in a field like I do now in international finance, do a better job of messaging, because I think that it's incumbent on those people who work in this field to help make those connections for people, because it sometimes isn't, self-evident. And why would you assume that somebody would understand that? And so coming up with the right messaging, I think will be, is really important. And obviously, as we've seen over the past 4 years, where the country's become even more polarized, it's really important to get the messages right. And that's, at a government to government basis, business to business, organization to organization, or, how you think about people in another country or people from another country who are now here in the United States. So, to me, it's a great field to be in, and it's very interesting, but it's also incredibly practical and really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think when you were talking about that we're all interconnected, and we were speaking a little bit about this offline as well, is it's the same thing. I think this is definitely synergistic with the conversation, the DE&I conversation, in that, in the workplace, or, that we're all human, we're all brothers and sisters, so to speak. We're all part of the human race. And that there just seems to be such a lag in us having compassion and trust and really love for each other. And the importance in that is we, start to go back to the workplace, and when emotions are high and this and that, and prior to making judgment, thinking what it might be like. We don't know if someone who's refusing to come back, if they're living with someone who is ill or with older or
Right.
that. And I had brought up a situation that, and I talked to you about it. I'm a little hesitant to bring it up on air, but I think it's an important message. That I was speaking at a conference right before the pandemic started. It was called World Changing Women. It was in Sonoma, California in January 2020. We're at a conference that split the women up into women of color and women who identify as not being in color. And so I had asked to sit in with the women in color. And my intention was to learn and understand.
Right.
And it turned into, I was confronted by one of the women there, and she was very, very angry at me. And at the time I felt attacked, and I'm like, my intentions are pure. What's happening? This is inappropriate. And what I learned is that I did not understand. I was not empathetic towards her. And if I was, I probably wouldn't have asked. And that I didn't understand my privilege. I did not understand what she had experienced in her life, what her kids have experienced, and all of that type of thing. And I think that's really important. We talked a little bit too about, a conversation maybe that I had, with my husband. He was like, I'm accepting, I'm not biased. And I had to say, hang on a second. One thing that I've learned in the last year, even though many of us are not intentionally biased, but we are, because we have not walked in someone else's shoes,
Right.
not understand their experience. And so I just think that has been so, so valuable to understand. And whether it's international policy in our workplace or in our homes, we have to take a step back to educate ourselves and truly be empathetic. And that doesn't mean wondering what it's like to be in someone's shoes, but really experiencing it.
Right.
I just think that's going to be so important going forward, and I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, no, I mean, the issue of unconscious bias is huge. And, that kind of speaks to that whole, but I'm not biased. And it's like, yes, I'm sure you don't, I don't mean to be biased. It's not my intention, but there is kind of unconscious bias out there that affects how we interact with people, or how, our companies, hire people or promote people. There's a wide range of things there. And, going back to what you're saying about empathy, I agree. It's really important. But also just actually truly listening to someone. And that may seem, again, sort of a basic thing to say, but, listening and understanding and trying to internalize and understand, as opposed to just listening and hearing and assuming you're hearing what you think you're hearing. Because while you're talking to somebody or listening to somebody or having someone explain something to you in a certain way, or why something bothered them or why something's affecting them, you shouldn't be filling in the blanks internally into, oh yeah, I know what she's going to say, or I know what he's going to say. Because then, you're just putting your own sort of veneer of how you think about things on that person, and you're not truly listening. And you're not actually going to understand what they're trying to tell you. And I think we're all guilty of that from time to time. But that's incredibly important to do in a relationship, a personal relationship, and in a relationship with your family, and in your relationships in the office, and in the workplace, because that can lead to, again, a lot of misunderstandings and miscalculations, and then bad feelings between individuals. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, so it's really listening to understand rather than listening to respond and judging. And I know it's firsthand. My awareness is very high, and it still doesn't mean that I never do it. So
Right.
definitely, I'm a work in progress, and I really applaud all of the folks that are in this space right now, and the companies trying to change that. So as we close out, is there something that you would like to leave people with? So in other words, one or two, there have been many more, but one or two gold nuggets of wisdom that you like people to consider, to move forward with as they move forward in their lives.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before we came on air. And yeah, I was, I would love to say that there's, something profound, but there's a couple things that I think are important, and especially for people who are kind of emerging leaders or up and comers. And one of them is, if someone sees something in you, don't doubt yourself. It is hard sometimes for a person, for me, let's say, to see some qualities or things that I'm good at, because it's just not the way I think or perceive myself. But when someone comes to you and says, wow, I saw this overview that you wrote. You're a terrific writer. Have you thought about doing more of that? Have you thought about volunteering to do X, or have you thought about volunteering to take on this project? Don't, as a person, as the person who's being talked to, don't say, oh God, I could never do that. I don't know what that person's thinking. Because chances are, if it's somebody who's been in the workplace longer, who's a little more senior, they're identifying something that you didn't know existed within yourself. But that should be the opportunity that you jump on. And again, it goes back to the whole, kind of being scared, maybe being scared of failing, maybe scared of not being perfect in that instance. But you should listen to the people who recognize talents and strengths and skills in yourself, because it's sometimes very hard to do that yourself. So that would be one thing that I would like to leave people with. And obviously, my mantra of, you don't have to be perfect. I sound a bit like a broken record there. But I think that's the other very kind of key issue. And then the last thing, and it's a little bit unrelated to what we were just talking about, but we're all incredibly busy in our lives and in our jobs. And sometimes things that we're very interested in or passionate about don't make their way into our vocation. It's not what we do on a daily basis. But I would just say that, I think it's very important that if there are things that you are interested in, that you try to pursue those in other ways, whether it's volunteering, whether it's, you know, mentoring somebody, doing a big brother, big sister sort of situation, whether it's taking classes online. It's just, you know, life is too short to not be able to pursue things that you're interested in. And even if it's not what helps you bring home the paycheck, it's still really important to do. And it will actually end up being very fulfilling. And you'll be able to have it make an impact in a lot of different ways, even outside of your organization and your family. And so you're able to kind of spread the wealth even more broadly. So that's sometimes hard to do, and it's sometimes difficult to figure out where to start. But I think it's really important and gives people a lot of sort of fulfillment, and also is good for the greater good of humanity.
Yeah, and then what's the one org, real quick, that you are working with that you just want to make people aware of?
Yeah, sure. So I'm working with, I'm recently on the board of an organization called Watershed Collaborative, and it's a New York City-based nonprofit that's in the education space. And they're focused on making a particular method of education. It's called VTS, Visual Thinking Strategies, scalable and more widely available to schools and teachers. VTS actually, interestingly, started off for art education, but now it's been adapted to pre-K through 12 schools. And it's really effective in promoting academic learning and communication skills, and evidentiary reasoning and critical thinking. And again, those are all the sorts of skills that you know, are so essential in times like these, and that will make you, you know, not just a good student, but a good citizen. And so this is a way of trying to scale this on a global basis. And so it's a great organization. I've only been on the board for a few months, but I'm just staggered by the kind of quality of the product and the passion of the team there. So I commend everyone to check it out, Watershed Collaborative. But you know, whether that's something you're interested in or not, you know, it's important to find that thing that you feel passionate about and go for it.
Yeah, and I assume that's watershedcollaborative.org.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. It sounds like something that the Dalai Lama would give a stamp of approval on. Because I just finished his book, The Book of Joy, and he really talks a lot about helping to, you know, heal humanity. And so I honor you for all of your amazing expertise and all the good that you're putting into the world. Thanks so much, Greer Meisels. It has been a really pleasure to have a conversation today.
Thank you so much, Sheryl. It's been great. Thanks again for inviting me. I've really enjoyed my time.